Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. Today is day 2 of our 3 days of Main Street Recovery Finance Program listening sessions. The next session, if you need to tell someone or come back, is going to be Thursday at 10 a.m. Today we're going to go over a little bit of what the Economic Recovery Act is, and then get into detail on the Main Street Recovery Finance Program itself. So a little bit about the New Jersey Economic Recovery Act. Abby, if you can flip that slide. Governor Murphy signed the New Jersey Economic Recovery Act into law on January 7th of this year. It creates a package of tax incentives, financing, and grant programs that are there to build a stronger and fairer New Jersey economy. It's considered a broad-based recovery bill and reform bill that will work to better position New Jersey to recover from the economic crisis caused by COVID. And if you want information overall on the Economic Recovery Act, you can find that on the NJEDA's website at njeda.com/Economic Recovery Act. Next slide. So our commitment to transparency, equity, and faithful stewardship of taxpayer dollars continues with this series. And our goal is to welcome constructive input from all New Jerseyans as we work through the process of implementing the programs under the ERA. General program feedback can be provided online. Program-specific feedback can be provided here today through public comment or on the website, and then formal regulatory feedback will follow once the rules have been promulgated. Pursuant to Governor Murphy's executive order, the NJEDA is providing opportunities for groups and stakeholders and individuals to engage with us in crafting the rules surrounding the Main Street Recovery Finance Program. Again, constructive input helps us to ensure that new programs are created through the Economic Recovery Act and structured and administered in a manner that drives opportunities for all New Jersey residents and communities. We're getting to this session, could be around 70 to 90 minutes with the public input portion reserved for the end. Next slide. Some public feedback policy. In order to provide comment, you're going to raise your hand. It's a Zoom function at the bottom of your screen, a little yellow hand we're all probably pretty used to now. And we'll call on you in order of the hand raise. I'll acknowledge each speaker, we'll unmute your microphone and ask you to provide your comment. Each speaker is going to have a minimum of 3 or a maximum of 3 minutes to speak. And if there's more that you want to say and we have time, you can raise your hand again, but we'll move you to the end of the line. Please don't expect to engage in a large dialogue about the program. We may respond to some basic questions, but the goal is to get your feedback. If we need to provide some guiding remarks, we certainly will. And then, of course, at all times, remember to maintain proper decorum and provide your remarks in a civil manner. I'm sure, and everybody to date has. At this point, I'm going to turn the program over to Ty Cooper, who is our Chief Community Development Officer, and she's going to give you some more guiding kind of strokes surrounding the Main Street Recovery Act. Thanks, Ty.
Thank you so much, Patience. I really appreciate that. Thank you guys so much for joining us today, this Tuesday at 2 p.m. Happy Tuesday. As we begin the long process of recovering from COVID-19 pandemic, the resources this program makes available to small businesses will be vital to ensuring a strong and equitable recovery. Today's listening session will help us make sure this program addresses your needs in the most effective and efficient way, so pay attention and ask lots of really good questions. Since he took office, Governor Murphy has been dedicated to building a stronger, fairer New Jersey economy that works for all of us, everyone in New Jersey. The New Jersey Economic Recovery Act creates a new package of programs designed to keep our state moving toward this goal. Among other programs, the ERA includes tax credits to incentivize job creation, new construction, and revitalization of brownfields and historic properties, financial resources for small businesses, support for new supermarkets and healthy food retailers and food desert communities, that's a mouthful, new funding opportunities for early stage companies in New Jersey, and support for our growing and pretty awesome film and digital media industry. One of the governor's top priorities is supporting small businesses in Main Street communities throughout the state. Throughout COVID-19 pandemic, the NJEDA has provided hundreds of millions of dollars in relief to more than 75,000 small businesses throughout the state, and it has been our pleasure to serve you. Other state agencies, including HMFA, DCA, and NJRA, have also been our partners throughout this pandemic. Now, as we begin to recover from the worst of the pandemic, we are shifting our focus to achieving a stronger, fairer recovery. And the focus now is on the recovery. The Main Street Recovery Finance Program is a key component of these recovery efforts that will provide $100 million in grants and loans to small and micro businesses. Cristina Fuentes is going to go over those programs in much more detail, but we're going to talk about CDFIs and MDIs and a whole bunch more. In line with Governor Murphy and the NJEDA's commitment to transparency and public engagement, we are proud to share the draft rules for the program with you today for your input. You know what best resources you need, and we look forward to hearing your insights on how to ensure this program, the Main Street Recovery Finance Program, is effective and fair. Thank you in advance for your input, and we're excited to hear from you. Now I'm going to turn it over to Cristina Fuentes, Managing Director of Community Development. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ty. So the Main Street Recovery Program essentially creates a $100 million appropriation designated to Treasury, who then will turn that fund over to EDA to create products and programs. And those products can essentially be grants to support small businesses, loans to support micro businesses, and also resources for other eligible lenders that can provide support to micro businesses as well. So the grants that will be established for small businesses will support New Jersey small businesses that are defined by SBA to support improvements, operating expenses towards lease payments, and purchases of equipment and installing that equipment as well. Also, loans to micro businesses will offer low-cost financing to support a micro business that's defined as 10 or less full-time employees, and then also less than 1.5 million in revenue based on their last tax return. Our other lenders that we will look to for supporting our micro businesses will have to have a 10-year experience in supporting traditional micro businesses as well, but will provide not only access to capital, but also technical assistance for those businesses to access the capital they will provide. And those partners we're going to look to leverage will be our community development financial institutions, otherwise known as CDFIs, our minority depository institutions, MDIs, zone development corporations in cities with a population of 100,000 or more, community development corporations, and economic development corporations as well. Next slide, please. So the two grants that will be established through this will be a small business lease grant, which will help support through grants businesses that are going into new space or adding additional space. And then also a small business improvement grant, which will reimburse a business owner for any type of cost associated to making interior, exterior building improvements, but then also purchasing and installing equipment or what we would consider furniture, fixtures, and equipment. So, next slide. The first grant program will be the Small Business Lease Grant, which will have a 40% set aside for eligible census tracts that are considered opportunity zones. And then the grant will essentially help, it'll be dispersed in 2 disbursements, but at time of application, the lease can be executed up to 12 months prior to their application. And the way it will be is at approval, they'll receive their first disbursement, which will equate to 20% of their annual lease payments. Then after 12 months after that, they will essentially receive another grant to support their lease payments. And then again, will be 20% of their annual lease payments. If someone has multiple locations, they can apply for that. If it's one EIN with 3 locations, they essentially can do 3 applications because it's based per location. There will not be an application fee, but there will be an approval fee. So at time of approval, they will be able to pay their fee and then be able to execute their grant agreement with EDA. Next slide. Some eligibility criteria will essentially be they would have to meet the definition of a small business based upon their NAICS code. They would have to provide a current tax clearance certificate and be in good standing with the state. As far as we would do checks with Department of Labor and DEP as well too. We'd also ensure at time of application that they're in good standing with EDA. And then they would also have to, at time of application, certify that they would be willing to pay the minimum wage requirements associated to the products. So it would essentially have to be the greater of $15 an hour or 120% of minimum wage rates. If it is an entity that has tipped employees, then they only have to meet the criteria of 120% of minimum wage rates. Since we would be requiring a lease that's a 5-year term, this compliance period would exist for the 5 years. They would have to commit to remaining in that facility as well too for their grant agreement, which would be the 5 years. And this product would be available to both nonprofits and commercial businesses. Next slide. The lease would essentially have to be for at least 500 up to 10,000 square feet for office, retail space, which would encompass most of commercial space as well too. Although if the space is larger than 10,000 square feet, it's still eligible, but we're only going to incentivize the 10,000 square feet. It would have to be for a new lease, a lease amendment, or an extension, adding at least the 500 square feet of space as well too. It must incorporate street level or first floor space. It can be a first floor and a second floor, or a first floor and a basement, but it has to incorporate the first floor to be eligible. And it would have to be at least a minimum 5-year term. And it has to be a market rate lease as well too, just to ensure that, we use CoStar data to ensure that landlord is charging a market rate lease, and we would be able to determine that as well too. And again, at time of application, the lease can't be executed any longer than 12 months. So we would look at time of application, you provide your lease so we could demonstrate that as well too. Next slide. Some exclusions around the grant program essentially would be, we wouldn't want to look to see an applicant terminate or exit their lease just to pursue an incentive, so they couldn't go for the same square footage. A business that is essentially in the business lease assistance program that would still fit the timing criteria could opt out if they chose to do so. And then also they have to make their lease payments. They can't default or leave the space because we are providing a grant at approval. They would essentially receive those funds prior to that. So we want to make sure that they would be staying in that space. High tech and business incubators that are members in nonprofit facilities would not be eligible because typically it's a state institution that provides more attractive incentives for that space. But any type of operator that of an incubator would be eligible for this incentive. We also want to make sure landlords that have an ownership interest in the tenant would not be eligible as well too. Next slide. The next grant would be the Small Business Improvement Grant. Again, would have a 40% set aside for eligible opportunity zone census tracts. This grant would be a reimbursement up to 50% of the project costs with a maximum award of $50,000. This could support interior, exterior renovations. It could support purchasing of equipment, installation, and also furniture and fixtures as well too. It would have to be a minimum project cost of at least $5,000. And this is a limit of 1 application per EIN. Entities that have multiple locations under that 1 EIN can submit the multiple location costs all into 1 application, and you want to make sure you're doing equipment and renovations all in 1 application as well too. Again, would just be approval fee at time of approval and then executing their grant agreement. Some eligibility criteria would be meeting the definition of an SBA small business. They would have to rent or own and operate the facility at a commercial business, providing a current tax clearance certificate and being in good standing with Department of Labor and Department of Environmental Protection. Also certifying an application that they're not in default with any other EDA products. And again, at time of application, they would have to certify to be participating in the minimum wage requirements, and it'd be similar to the fact that greater of $15 an hour or 120% of the minimum wage rate. For tipped employees, it would just be the 120% of minimum wage rate. Nonprofits and commercial businesses would be eligible for this program as well, and business could essentially receive the lease grant and improvement grant as well too. Next slide. Eligibility criteria for this would be, we would want to make sure it's a reimbursement of any type of purchase of the FF&E and equipment and any type of interior exterior renovation. A home-based business could be eligible for this, but only for purchase and installation of FF&E. We wouldn't allow any type of renovations or improvements. The work would have to be completed on or after March 9th, 2020, but no more than 2 years prior to application date. And they would have to provide documentation, since it is a reimbursement, that, you know, proof of payment and demonstration of the work. So we're looking for invoices, statements, payments, and canceled checks. The project cost would have to be at least $5,000. And it would be up to the applicant to do the additional local approvals as well too. So if there's any type of zoning or building permits required for the project, that would be up to the applicant to pursue those. Projects over $50,000 would be considered to use the, they would have to use the green building standards for lighting and mechanical work. So any type of lighting improvements for interior, exterior, or if they're looking to do an HVAC system, you want to ensure that you're, you know, doing the installation of cost saving benefits that essentially are to that small business too. So if the applicant is leasing the space, we also want to just get permission from the landlord to make sure those improvements are allowed as well too, if it's not identified in the current lease. And then any contractor that the applicant would essentially use, if there's 4 employees or more, there's affirmative action requirements, and it's essentially just filling out 2 forms. That would be part of the application as well too. Next slide. Some, you know, requirements around the statute would be as identified. You know, we talked about the wage requirements. So essentially employees, again, have to certify that they're willing to pay the grader up to $15 an hour, 120% of the minimum wage, unless they're tipped. Then it's just the 120% of minimum wage. We would be checking that yearly for the compliance period as well too. So we would demonstrate that by asking for specific proof of WR30, payroll reports, or equivalent documentation, depending on what type of business entity we would be working with would determine that. Ensuring that green building standards are being followed as well too for any project that would be over the $50,000 thresholds. And then also the affirmative action, again, that would just be part of your application, filing the necessary paperwork. And then we have to make sure to just to highlight that the compliance period with the lease grant essentially would be the 5 years. Again, agreeing to that space. So you agree to the terms by staying in that space. And then with the improvement grant, if your grant is less than $25,000, your compliance period would be for 2 years of that grant agreement. It would highlight that. And so again, for those 2 years, you're paying your employees the required wage rates and staying in the space. If your grant is over $25,000, then your requirement for compliance would be the 4 years. Next slide. We also have the ability with the fund to be able to pilot some programs as well too. So if the grants are not an ideal fit, then we would be providing some additional resources like our micro business loan program. We would essentially be relaunching that. And that provides access to capital for micro businesses. The wage requirements are not under the loan products, they're just for the grants. So with this, you could get access up to $50,000 at attractive terms. And then we would also be looking to leverage our partners as well too that we identified, but providing them access to capital to lend out on the local level too, but then also providing technical assistance. So we would look to those partners we highlighted, like the CDFIs, MDIs, zone development corporations, EDCs, CDCs, providing them access to capital and then lending it out to micro businesses at attractive terms too. But then also ensuring that they can receive technical assistance as well too. So the technical assistance could essentially be, you know, helping credit repair services, business plan writing, if they need projections in order to qualify for loan, and additional services like that too. Next slide. I believe that's my portion, so I'll pass it back to Patience.
Thanks, Christina. Thanks for all the information. So here we are at public comment, and it looks like there are a number of you on. In order to be called in order for public comment, you just need to raise that little yellow hand, and we will allow you to unmute your microphone and give us your contribution to the Main Street Recovery Fund project or program. So don't be shy. Oh, okay, so Abby, if you can unmute Kiera Colon, and if I said that correctly, Kiera.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Awesome. So I just had a question. I was wondering if the Small Business Improvement Grant is only for reimbursements of businesses that have already been renovated or improved. It's not at all for investing into small businesses that want to renovate or improve, but haven't had the access to the funds to do so.
No, it would just be a reimbursement. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's helpful for people that have already had access to the capital. But I guess it wouldn't be as helpful for like communities like minorities who haven't really necessarily had access to do those things, especially during COVID. I really like the micro business loans. I think that that's going to be really helpful just because it's going to give people access to capital. I was wondering if a specific portion of those grants are going to be going to Black and Latino owned micro businesses.
So we're doing the 40% set aside. However, we still, once we establish through a disparity study what our percentages would be, then we would have to go back to board and then establish those set aside requirements that we would have to do. So for right now, it's the 40% set aside. However, that's just a temporary, kind of solution of what we have, but we still have to do this disparity study in order to qualify what the percentages would be for the products. Yeah.
All right, thank you. That was helpful.
I don't see anyone else currently. Oh, here we go. Abby, if you can unmute Catherine Harrison.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes, Catherine, let us know who you are and if you're calling on behalf of yourself or an organization, please.
Hi, yes, my name is Catherine Harrison, or I go by Cat, and I work for LIADA, Latin American Economic Development Association. Thank you so much for the time to ask a question. I came into the presentation about 10 minutes late, so please forgive me if I'm already asking a question that was answered. My question is, it's very clear that lenders, as well as smaller organizations like micro lenders, CDFIs, are getting access to the micro business loan money to be the, to be the channel through which that gets lended out. What if any access to these funds do organizations, nonprofit organizations such as LIADA, who do provide those supplementary services, those critical supplementary services like counseling and training? What kind of access to these funds do we get? And if not, how are we expected to, are there guidelines as to like how we collaborate with, with the lenders, with the micro lenders?
So in the statute, it establishes nonprofit lenders as well too. You would still have to have a demonstrated experience of 10 years servicing micro businesses to be eligible. So as long as you would fit that criteria, you could still participate.
Okay, so we don't, but we do have 30 plus years in providing supplementary services. So is there any role, I guess what I'm asking, is there any role for an organization such as LIADA to participate and facilitate this program to clients?
So I think you're speaking in terms of more technical assistance is what
yes.
you would be providing to the micro business. So, I mean, at this time, we have the ability to pilot programs. If you want to provide your feedback, there is a link that you can go and, highlight ways of being able to do that. So I would just suggest that, you utilize that as a platform. But the benefit to this is, although there's these 2 grants, we will be piloting additional programs as well too. So we do have some flexibility in doing additional stuff. So I think that, the best way to kind of do this is really provide that feedback. And then that goes for anyone who's participating in this. If you feel like you think, maybe it's later in the day, you're like, oh, what about this? Please use this link to provide that feedback because that's what we want. We want to hear that. So I would suggest using that. And, I appreciate your input.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Christina.
Sure.
And we'll give it a minute, seems like folks get a little more adventurous after someone else has gone before them. I don't currently see any hands up. I don't know if there were other questions or comments that were around there. I hadn't seen any of that. So I think what we'll do is remind everyone that to provide program specific feedback, you're going to go to njeda.com/program-specific-feedback. And as Christina mentioned, any comments, any thoughts you have as these programs are being created are welcome and considered, and what we're looking for in order to make sure that we're hearing everyone. Okay, we've got C. All you needed is a little bit of time. Abby, if you can unmute Stu, and Stu, if you can tell us who you are and where you're calling from or who you're representing. Thanks.
Yeah, my name is Stu Bressler. I'm a consultant that works with a couple of agencies in Elizabeth, New Jersey. And this is, I don't know if it's more a question or a suggestion. I know I work with a number of DCA neighborhood-based commercial programs. And have you had any discussions with the DCA staff responsible for their programs to see how you can use their state and federal funding to leverage your money, or vice versa? How you could work with those neighborhood-based programs, which are many of which are targeted in opportunity zones or targeted to the kind of businesses that you're trying to assist. Have you had any discussions with DCA staff about how your program can work with their programs?
Yeah, absolutely. So we work very closely with DCA and Jeff Buehler, who he heads up the neighborhood preservation program. So
right.
And then so I figured that's where you were going. So yeah, we work very closely with him, and then also Sean Thompson as well, who administers the Main Street programs too.
Main Street, right.
Yeah. Yep. So I just want to remind people too that as you know, with some of the federal funding, right, you have to demonstrate a need and a 25% loss in revenue, typically, with sometimes in certain products. So these products are very different because they're under state appropriations. So these are more kind of, supplemental grants to kind of support a small business that may have purchased equipment and, can submit this. And it's not that measurement of need. And so with the neighborhood preservation program, which they're currently looking to expand as well too, they'll be able to utilize these because these were previous grants that we did in very targeted areas, and now we've expanded them to statewide. So this is eligible statewide, but also NPP can utilize these as well in those local neighborhoods. So.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Stu. Okay, so no hands up currently. Please raise your hand if you want to make a comment. We'll give it a minute, and there we go. Jane Assalta. Hi, Jane. Jane, can you announce yourself and tell us who you're with?
Hey, patients. Hi, Christine. Jane Assalta with the Southern New Jersey Development Council. Quick just comment. I guess my concern is for the wage requirement. The minimum wage currently isn't at $15, as you know. And it won't be until 2025. And as this is a reimbursement for a period of since 2020, that rate wasn't applicable then either. So I'm just concerned that the wage rate will not just be a disincentive, but also a barrier, particularly for those kinds of companies, the small women-owned, minority-owned businesses that might not be able to, have met that wage rate since 2020. And it's currently not required of them, and yet this this program requires them to be willing to.
Yeah, so this is a requirement identified under the statute, which supports a holistic policy around being able to really provide livable wages for employees as well too. So again, it is under the grants. So if businesses feel like they're a good fit for that, then it's open and eligible to them. But then we also have additional resources to provide them some access to capital. But it is essentially something that it's a choice and an option for the business owner.
Okay, thank you. So it's statutory. I didn't appreciate that it was written into the ERA. Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, James. Okay, so anyone else would like to raise their hand? I feel like I'm calling for the final every time, and every time we get a new person. If not, then again, I'll point out njeda.com/program-specific-feedback, and also remind you that there will be another session tomorrow at 10 a.m. So if you've got folks that you think should be a part of this and give us some feedback, please share that information with them. Again, njeda.com/program-specific-feedback. And thanks everyone for joining us today. We appreciate your time and you're taking the time to provide your comments.